Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Kerbal space program. If you have seen the last video uploaded, then you know that this is a rocket inside of a plane, and what I do is I fly the plane up to an altitude, still within the atmosphere, drop the rocket out from beneath, and then launch the rocket up and take it up into orbit. Or do we? Or do we take it further? Because in the video I made, we only took it to orbit. Now I'm going to see how far it can go. In the ideal launch scenario, how far can I get this thing to work? So here we go, the plane starts its engines and it tears itself down the runway. This plane is really fast. This is a different version, I guess, a different model to the one that I showed in the previous video, because I spent a live stream refining and improving the design, and this is eventually what we came up with collectively. On Sunday, that live stream will be released in two parts on YouTube, because the recording cut away, it cuts in halfway through, or just over halfway through, but the point is it'll be two videos, okay, so just keep an eye out for that. But yes, you can notice some of the designs are changed. We have a lot less wing surface spammed everywhere. Still have the double wings because I felt that I needed a bit more lift. But in general, it's a bit more of a smoother, sleeker design and a lot less heavy. I think I'm using a smaller cargo compartment, but even if I'm not, the mass overall is much better balanced. It's all in the center. Everything is built around the very central section of the plane, meaning that when the payload leaves, the center of mass stays in the middle. So actually, whether you have the payload or whether you don't have the payload doesn't affect the position of the center of mass. And because the lift isn't going to change, that means that the balance is really quite good. It's quite predictable, and it ought to fly very similarly with and without the payload. In addition to that, the fuel I have both in front, behind and to the side of the main body of the plane is balanced so that it'll drain equally. So as I burn my fuel, the center of mass ought to move ever so slightly, but not enough to make a difference. So those are just a few of the things I've made, a few of the changes I've made. And now we're up to about 20 kilometers and it's time for us to see just what this can do. In an ideal scenario, I open up the cargo bay doors, I drop the payload, I allow the liquid fuel to burn and the engines come to life, and quickly I start pitching up in order to gain the altitude that I would have been gaining were this a standard launch. We have plenty of horizontal speed right now, we're going at over 1 km per second, but all of that is sideways, and we're still in relatively thick atmosphere. Now, as the plane, or as the rocket starts burning its way up into orbit, we can micromanage two different missions. In reality, I had to go back and record this afterwards, because when two craft get too far away from each other, they start, one of them gets deleted. The one that you're not paying attention to gets removed by the game. But, with the magic of video editing, dun 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 dum, we have the plane. So the first thing I'm going to do is just turn around this plane and start flying it back whilst our rocket goes up into orbit. I can present this as the mission would actually be, or very close to what the mission would actually be, because I've got the two separate recordings and I'll just interleave them. So we have the plane and we start bringing it around. Now we're going very fast at a very high altitude where the density of the air really is quite thin, and this means that the wing surfaces that we have aren't doing as much work as they would be doing otherwise. You can see I'm trying to turn it, and I'm using the exhaust from the engines to try and push me in the direction that I'm wanting to turn, but really the prograde marker isn't moving with us. So if I push the nose down and aim towards the prograde marker, so I'm going along our direction, I can start to get a bit more of an effect because the airstream is going over the wings as it would be if I was flying forward, and I get to have a bit more of an effect with the turning. Really, if you look at our jet stream, look at the exhaust behind us, we're actually falling really quickly in a kind of unstable flight path. But just so long as we can get the plane turned around, I can eventually pull the nose back up and bring our velocity vector back to where we wanted. We didn't spin out of control because of the balance of the plane, and it's pretty much okay. Anyway, that's, the plane, maybe not too interesting, but now we get to the interesting part. So switching back to our rocket, which has continued in the meantime up into orbit, we are just now out of the atmosphere, and we're just about at our apoapsis. So, burning prograde at full throttle, I'm trying to manage the height of the apoapsis. I don't want to lose, I don't want to spend too much energy raising our apoapsis, which is our highest point in our trajectory, because what I'm focused on is increasing the lowest point in our trajectory until we get a roughly circular orbit that is just above the atmosphere of the planet, which is about 70 kilometers. We've got 71, 72, that's a pretty circular for me. Now, we have a fair amount of fuel, we've got just under half of our capacity. What can we do with it? Well, landing on the moon is a potential answer, but I'm thinking MINMUS. If I remember rightly, it actually takes less delta V to get to MINMUS, land on it and return, than it does to land on the moon. The moon is closer, sure, but it has a much higher gravity. Its acceleration due to gravity at its surface must be... I don't actually know what the figure is, must be several times, at least several times that of MINMUS. Which means bringing ourselves down onto the surface of the moon whilst not crashing, and then taking off and escaping from its orbit once more, requires a hell of a amount of fuel. It requires a lot of fuel. Much more than MINMUS does. And the difference between pushing our velocity out to the moon's orbit and to MINMUS's orbit really isn't that big. I mean, the distance that we're actually covering there is more than double, but due to the inverse square law of gravitation, which means... how do I explain this? Basically, the energy you put in at a higher altitude will have more effect. So the further away you are from the gravitational body, the more effect your energy has. So you get more bang for your buck, right? Trying to raise your altitude from 70 kilometers to 80 kilometers takes a lot of energy, but trying to raise it from 120 to 130 takes a lot less. So by the time we've got our velocity out to the moons, and were we to stop at that point and then try and land on the moon, we wouldn't be spending that much less fuel than if we got it out to the moons and then increased it out to MINMUS's. And when we actually do the burn, you ought to be able to see this. So anyway, we're back on our plane now, and you can see the beautiful fire effects. When I was doing the live stream, everyone was telling me, as you will see, everyone was telling me to make sure you have heat shields, you know? You don't want things are going to explode, things are going to burn off, and indeed you can actually see I'm pointing with my finger, I always do this, you can actually see the damage markers. The UI telling us how damaged each part is, which, you know, is a bit worrying, but as we get down lower, it does start to decrease, and eventually they disappear. And now, rather than fire effects, we just have those Mach effects that we like to see. Rather than going straight in for the landing, I'm going to fly over the Space Center, get a good distance, and then turn around. And it's this turn which will decrease our velocity significantly, I think. Because with the new aerodynamic model, you can actually get down to quite a low altitude and still maintain your speed. A scary speed as well, you can maintain really, really quick speeds. So getting down to the altitude and slowing down in time for me to land on the runway isn't something that is a particularly safe idea. So rather than do that, I'm just going to turn around and manage my speed as I come back in for the landing. It seems to make sense, and it seems to work particularly well, or will it? Now, we will have to see, because this is the challenge, landing the plane, which has been designed to fly with a payload without a payload. Will it land properly? We get contact light, kind of just bouncing a little, but we're on the ground. We're on the ground, nice and safe. We increase the brake of the front wheel. More stable to do it with the back wheels. The reason I do it with the front wheel, increasing the brake torque, the brake force, is so that I don't have to do both of the back wheels. Because if I increase the brake torque of one whilst we're landing, then it'll veer to that side, and then I have to go back and increase the other, and it could cause instability in the landing, and, you know, horrible things could happen. But hey, I managed to land the plane safely. Oh, and in case you're wondering, the reason why I don't have the brake torque much higher in the first place is because I'm scared that if I land and then put on the brakes and they're really, the brake torque is really high, it could cause instability in that regard. You know, it might flip out and just, stop. Like that. Here we are, back into orbit. So we've landed the plane is all sorted, we've done that part of the mission, now we can begin our burn. So the idea I was talking about, the inverse square law, we can see exactly, we can measure it in time, just because, you know, we have constant thrust, which means we're draining fuel at a constant rate, which means how long it takes us to change our orbit ought to have some indication of that. But I mean, there you go. We didn't quite see it properly, but you could just about tell there, can't you? The orbit we had when I stopped thrusting was just beyond the moons. I then thrusted for a mere second or so, and we were already out to MINMUS. Compared to how long it took us to get out to the moon, right? You get that effect. I think it's quite intuitive, but, you know, you may not, so I just wanted to try and explain that. Very badly, I understand. I didn't explain that very well. Well. Probably, the chances are that you watching this are probably seasoned KSP players yourself, so it is something you probably have a grasp of. Anyway, increasing the periapsis of the moon to bring it above the surface so that we don't crash and die horribly, we're now racing down. We have 200 and... I can't actually read that number on my preview window. 200 and something units of liquid fuel, probably. Anyway, we time warp, we get down to the periapsis. You gotta be really careful when time warping here, because the velocity you have, how quickly you're moving, changes really quickly before you notice it. You can be out really far away from MINMUS, moving ever so slowly. You time warp by several hundred times, then boom! You've already moved past it, you've already escaped from Kerbal, and you're now in orbit around the sun. It's a tricky one if you're not used to it. Luckily, I'm used to it because I've done this mission many times before. I just thought this was an interesting twist on the mission profile, because this rocket, rather than being launched from the ground, or rather than being launched in orbit, was launched in mid-air. I had so many people telling me, oh, it would be better if you took the plane into orbit and then released, or took it out of the atmosphere, and then had the rocket circularize its orbit whilst the plane fell back down. It would be better, but I didn't want to build a plane that had the specs in order to go that high. I wanted something small and quick and light that could take it up just to an altitude, and then my rocket could do the rest of the mission. That's just what I felt like doing. Plus, it means I was able to get away without those heat shields I was talking about. My craft didn't burn up, because it would have had to face re-entry from that suborbital hop, which isn't something I'm really not used to that, actually. I've not actually used the heat shields yet. Which may be blasphemy, but I haven't used the heat shields yet. I know. Nor the fairings, actually. I really want to use the fairings. Maybe my next few videos will be experimenting with that kind of stuff. Anyway, we've come out to MINMUS, and that's all well and great, but we don't have any landing legs, which is something you may have noticed. We do have these engines, however, and being the pilot that I am, if I fail to have landing legs, I'm just going to land on the engines. This is what we used to do back years ago. There's no reason not to do it now. I can do this. There we go. Perfectly fine. Plus, we do have the advanced SAS unit, which is keeping... Ooh, you like backflips, don't you? Which is keeping the craft pointed in one direction, so... You know, we can make do with that. And as you may have noticed as well, we have a flag already here. I've already done this mission. I think I did this during the live stream, or maybe just in my spare time while I was practicing for this. So, yeah. We have two flags planted next to each other. I thought it would be funny to land where the other one was. And it's also a good test of my targeting skills, and I came pretty close, you know. Pretty close on before I wimped out and landed. Anyway, we have done the mission, we have landed on MINMUS, we have tasted the MINMUS soil, or ice, or salt, depending on what it is. And now we can try and escape. So what I want to do is time warp until directly upwards is along the retrograde of MINMUS's orbit, which means when I thrust myself up off the surface, which is not a euphemism, when I burn upwards, when I increase my altitude and do exactly what I'm doing on screen right now, I don't have to do any sort of orbiting. I can just go straight from on the ground to escaping MINMUS's orbit, and my velocity vector is directly equal and opposite to that of MINMUS's orbit. Meaning I cancel out the velocity that I have just by the fact that I am with MINMUS right now, and I should end up falling pretty much straight down back to Kerbal. Talking about heat shields, speaking of the topic of heat shields and re-entering the atmosphere, this is quite an energetic re-entry. I'm falling from, 11 million, or is that the moons? Whatever the case, oh so many million meters, which means the kinetic energy I have when I hit the atmosphere is going to be really high. I think I'm going to be traveling about 3 kilometers per second when I hit the atmosphere, potentially even more. If this damn preview window is any bigger, I could actually read the numbers that are on screen right now. Oh, weirdly enough, I may well have hit it with many kilometers, and I went through so quickly that I came out the other side without even realizing. Oops. Now we're just going to orbit back out and then do that again. That would have been useful, actually, if I had done it intentionally, because I could have hit the atmosphere at its, at a much thinner part, so that I wasn't hitting such a thick blanket of air, and I wasn't, you know, undergoing such strain on the craft itself. See, what I've done now is, because I've entered the atmosphere, this is my actual landing procedure. I've burnt all the fuel in that module, meaning to slow down my velocity as much as possible before hitting the actual depth of the dense atmosphere, before undergoing all that stress and strain on the ship. And I've detached everything else apart from my command module, my cupola module with its beautiful windows and its beautiful parachutes, which will hopefully save us before we hit the ground. And look at that! I love it! I love the graphics of KSP. There's just something about the aesthetic, especially when you're coming in from orbit with the green below you and the mountains and the blue sky and the flames licking around the module. It just is attractive, okay? Don't judge. Stop judging me. I like the game, okay? Anyway, we are going down to the surface. I've got my parachutes and they open, and now we can enjoy another view with the orange parachutes contrasted against the blue of the sky. Blue and orange! I don't know if anyone will get that reference. I can use the radar altimeter as well to know exactly how high I am above the surface of this mountain, but I can save that discussion for another video. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching. If you liked it, then please do like the video, and I will see you all next time. Hi there, thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, then you may well enjoy some of the other stuff I do. There's Let's Plays, live streams every Sunday, and of course a variety of interesting gaming videos. Take a look, and don't forget that if you feel like it, you are welcome to support me over at my Patreon page. Big thanks to all my patrons. If you liked the video, please do like the video, and I will see you all next time.